Every time you fill up your car, you're participating in a deal that determines the fate of entire nations. That's not an exaggeration. It's the hidden reality that most people don't realize until it's too late. Over the past 50 years, almost every major military conflict in the Middle East has had one thing in common. No, not religion, not terrorism, not democracy. Oil and the currency it's sold in. This is the financial historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it seems. To understand why American soldiers die in the sands of Iraq, why Libya transformed from a prosperous nation into civil war chaos, and why Iran has been under sanctions for decades, we need to go back to 1971. That's when the system that governed global finance for nearly 3 decades collapsed. After World War II, the dollar was tied to gold. Any country could exchange its dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. This was called the Bretton Woods system, and it made the dollar as reliable as gold itself. But there was a problem. America was spending more than it earned. The Vietnam War was devouring billions. Social programs demanded even more. And countries began to notice that Washington was printing dollars faster than it was mining gold. France was the first to demand its dollars be exchanged for gold. Others followed. America's gold reserves were rapidly dwindling. And on August 15, 1971, President Nixon did the unthinkable. He closed the gold window. The dollar was no longer backed by anything except the promise of the American government. Sound familiar? It was a shock. World currencies began to fluctuate. Inflation soared. It seemed like dollar hegemony was over. But here's the paradox. Instead of collapsing, the dollar became even stronger. How is that possible? The answer lies hidden in the sands of Saudi Arabia. In 1973, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger made a series of secret visits to Riyadh. What happened behind closed doors changed the world. The deal was simple but brilliant. Saudi Arabia agreed to sell all its oil exclusively for dollars. In return, the United States guaranteed military protection for the royal family and supplies of the most advanced weapons. But that was only half the deal. The Saudis also agreed to invest their oil revenues back into American government bonds. Money left America for oil and immediately returned to the American financial system. A closed loop, a perfect machine. Think about this for a second. If you want to buy oil from any major exporter, you need dollars. It doesn't matter if you're in Germany, Japan, or China. First, you must buy dollars. This creates constant, inexhaustible demand for American currency around the world. By 1975, all OPEC countries followed Saudi Arabia's lead. The petrodollar was born. And with it, a new form of power emerged. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by something more valuable, a monopoly on trading the most important resource on the planet. Here's the uncomfortable truth that no one will tell you. The petrodollar isn't just an economic system. It's an instrument of geopolitical control. As long as the world trades oil for dollars, America can print money with virtually no consequences. Inflation gets exported to other countries. Debt becomes infinitely manageable. A military budget exceeding those of the next 10 countries combined remains funded. But what happens when someone tries to exit this system? History gives us chilling answers. Let's jump to the year 2000. Iraq. Saddam Hussein announces he will no longer sell oil for dollars. Instead, he's switching to euros. At the time, it seemed like an economic decision. The euro was strong, relations with the US were hostile. But Hussein didn't understand what he was playing with. In November 2000, Iraq officially began accepting euros for oil. By 2002, the country had accumulated significant reserves in European currency. And you know what? Iraq actually made money on this decision as the euro strengthened. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a loss of a few billion for the American financial system. It was a precedent. If other countries followed Iraq's example, the entire petrodollar system could collapse. Demand for the dollar would fall. America's ability to finance its debt and military spending would be undermined. In March 2003, American forces invaded Iraq. The official reason? Weapons of mass destruction that were never found. Ties to Al-Qaeda that were never proven. But do you know what occupying authorities did as one of their first steps? They returned Iraq's oil contracts to dollars. By June 2003, Iraqi oil was once again being sold exclusively for American currency. Coincidence? Perhaps. But history didn't stop there. Libya. Muammar Gaddafi ruled the country for 42 years. Despite all his flaws, Libya under Gaddafi had the highest standard of living in Africa. Free education, free healthcare, subsidized housing, and massive oil reserves. But in 2009, Gaddafi made a proposal that signed his death warrant. He proposed creating a unified African currency, the gold dinar. This currency was to be backed by gold and used for trading oil and other resources across the African continent. Imagine the consequences. 54 African countries trading resources for a gold-backed currency instead of the dollar. It would have been a seismic blow to the petrodollar system. And Gaddafi wasn't just talking, he was acting. Libya had accumulated 144 tons of gold. Plans were being made to create an African monetary fund and an African central bank. In 2011, NATO intervened in the Libyan civil war, officially to protect civilians. Gaddafi was overthrown and killed. The country plunged into chaos it still hasn't emerged from. And the gold dinar, buried along with its creator. Notice the pattern? 2 countries, 2 leaders who challenged the petrodollar, 2 military interventions, 2 identical outcomes. But if this shocks you, wait. The most interesting part is still ahead. Iran hasn't sold oil for dollars since 2007. Instead, the country accepts euros, yuan, rubles, and even gold. In 2008, Tehran opened its own oil exchange, where trading is conducted in any currency except dollars. And what happened? Iran has been under the harshest sanctions for nearly 2 decades. Its banks are disconnected from the international SWIFT system. Its assets are frozen. Its economy is strangled. The official reason for sanctions is the nuclear program. But here's a curious fact. Pakistan created nuclear weapons and received billions in American aid. Israel has a nuclear arsenal and remains America's closest ally. North Korea tests missiles and, at most, gets UN resolutions. But Iran, which hasn't even built a bomb, faces sanctions comparable to a military blockade. Why? Maybe it's not just about the nuclear program. Syria. Bashar Assad refused to allow a Qatari gas pipeline through his territory that was supposed to supply Europe and compete with Russian gas. Instead, he signed an agreement with Iran and Iraq to build an alternative pipeline. In 2011, civil war broke out in Syria. The US, Turkey, and Gulf states openly supported the rebels. The country was destroyed. Millions of refugees flooded into Europe. And to this day, the question of which gas will flow to Europe and in what currency it will be paid for remains unresolved. But here's where things get darkest. It's not about individual leaders or countries. It's about the system. The petrodollar isn't just a convenience for trade. It's a mechanism that allows the United States to maintain a trade deficit of trillions of dollars. America imports more than it exports. It consumes more than it produces. And the only reason this is possible is that the entire world is forced to buy dollars to buy oil. When you buy dollars, you're essentially giving an interest-free loan to the American government. Central banks around the world hold trillions in dollar reserves. That money is invested in American bonds, financing American debt, and American wars. This is the greatest financial scheme in human history. And it only works as long as everyone plays by the rules. But the rules are starting to change. In 2023, Saudi Arabia announced its willingness to accept yuan for oil. China has become the largest buyer of Saudi oil, and Beijing insisted on paying in its own currency. This was a tectonic shift. The BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are openly discussing creating an alternative currency for trade among themselves. Russia already sells oil to China and India for yuan and rupees. Iran and Russia have connected their banking systems, bypassing SWIFT. The process of de-dollarization, which seemed impossible just 10 years ago, is gaining momentum, and this puts Washington before an existential choice. Think about your life today. If the petrodollar system collapses, the consequences will affect everyone. Demand for the dollar will fall, interest rates in the US will skyrocket. The government won't be able to finance its debt. Inflation that America has been exporting to the world for decades will come back home. For ordinary Americans, This means rising prices on everything, from gas to groceries. For the rest of the world, it means instability, crises, and possibly wars. Because empires don't go quietly, they fight to the last. History teaches us a chilling lesson. Every time the petrodollar was threatened, military intervention or economic warfare followed. Iraq, Libya, Iran, Syria, Venezuela. The list goes on. But here's what you really need to understand. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's documented history. Kissinger's agreement with the Saudis is declassified. Iraq's switch to euros is a fact. Gaddafi's plans for the gold dinar are known from diplomatic correspondence published by WikiLeaks. Sanctions against Iran and their connection to the oil exchange are official policy. The question isn't whether there's a connection between the petrodollar and wars. The question is why almost no one talks about it. The answer is simple. Because this truth is uncomfortable. It destroys the narrative about wars for freedom and democracy. It shows that behind noble slogans lie cold financial calculations. It makes you think about who the military machine really serves. But if you know this history, you're harder to manipulate. You can see beyond the headlines. You can understand why some dictators are allies and others are enemies. Why some countries receive aid and others receive bombs. So, what should you do with this knowledge? First, understand that money and war always go hand in hand. This isn't cynicism. It's realism. Every military conflict has an economic dimension, and often economics is the main cause, not a side effect. Second, watch currency wars as closely as real ones. When a country announces a switch to another currency for oil trade, it's not just financial news, it's a potential casus belli. Third, diversify your savings. If the petrodollar system weakens, the dollar will lose significant value. Gold, real estate, assets in different currencies, this isn't paranoia. It's reasonable precaution in a world where financial systems can change faster than you think. Fourth, remember that you're part of this system. Every time you use the dollar, you strengthen its position. Every time your country buys American bonds, it finances this machine. Awareness is the first step to freedom. The world stands on the brink of massive change. The petrodollar system that has dominated for half a century is cracking at the seams. China is rising. Russia is challenging. The global south is demanding justice. And America faces a choice: adapt or fight. If history teaches us anything, the choice won't be made in favor of peaceful adaptation. Empires don't retreat voluntarily. They cling to power until the end. And the price of that clinging is always paid in blood, not by bankers and politicians, but by ordinary people who don't even understand what they're fighting for. Oil is the blood of the modern economy. The dollar is its heart. And the wars in the Middle East are operations to keep alive a system that should have changed long ago. Now you know what most will never know. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you just like everyone else. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.